I will sit over here and kind of chat.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you want to get into the
Yeah, let's do that. let's get close together. Oh, that's good, that's good. Actually,
Yeah?
don't move too far because you're out of the frame.
Okay,
this is perfect.
Yeah, this is good.
All right, so I'm very excited to be here with Karla and Weifeng, who have actually done a lot of work as far as, kind of analyzing policy and around China and Taiwan. So can you give us an introduction and tell us a little bit about yourselves? Karla, sorry, ladies first.
My name's Karla Jones. I'm the Senior Director of International Relations and Federalism at the American Legislative Exchange Council. I've been here for about 12 years, and I can say unequivocally that the state lawmaker members who join ALEC are very much supportive of Taiwan's sovereignty and Taiwan's democracy. It's one of the most important issues to them.
Okay, wonderful. And then how about you, Weifeng?
My name is Weifeng Zhong. I'm a senior research fellow with the Mercator Center at George Mason University. My research focuses on analyzing Chinese propaganda, domestic propaganda through, for example, official newspapers run by the Communist Party, and try to make inferences about what the Chinese government thinks about certain issues, including like relation with Taiwan, the U.S., and what it might do based on what it has said.
Absolutely. Yeah, I will be asking you about World Journal and all of those publications in just a bit. But Karla, picking up on what you were saying about Taiwan, and that ALEC and this organization supports the Free China. I have noticed that our government over the years has become less and less highlighting of the fact that there is a Taiwan, and have been cozying up very closely to People's Republic of China. Can you talk a little bit about that and kind of your perspective of how that has shifted, especially since the Clinton administration?
You mean the U.S.
The
federal
U.S. in
government?
general, yes.
I actually have seen a little bit of the opposite, I
Okay.
would think. First of all, former President Trump was the first president to acknowledge that our China policy had failed.
Yes.
That no matter how much capitalism, and that's probably not even the right word, how much state capitalism China would adopt, it was not going to make China a Western nation and make it a good actor on the world stage.
Absolutely.
And so I give him credit for recognizing the problem. I'm not sure he addressed it the way it should have been, but at least he recognized it, and at least he made it clear that America was there for Taiwan. And even with Biden, at first I was a little worried about what would happen with the Biden administration, but he at least is saying the right things. He is demonstrating, and Weifeng can go into more detail, but he is at least demonstrating that that the United States is going to stand, or at least he is showing that the United States will stand shoulder to shoulder with Taiwan. I mean, with the Quad, for example,
Wonderful.
AUKUS. So I'm actually more optimistic than I thought I would be.
Very interesting. I would love to explore that more. But I'm sorry, and I did misspeak because President Trump came down on People's Republic very strongly, with tariffs and all, last administration. But I think you would agree that there was probably a good generation, 25 years,
yes,
of giving China unchecked advantage, especially on an economic standpoint.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, and then that has changed in the last 5 years or so. So,
Yes.
Okay, very, very interesting. So, Weifeng, love to hear your thoughts on that as well, and where you see things are headed in the future with the Biden administration.
Sure, yeah. So I echo with what Karla just said. I think it's a very interesting point about U.S. policy toward Taiwan was the delicate balance of what's called the strategic ambiguity, right? So the U.S. is not going to say out loud whether or not the U.S. would defend Taiwan if China invades the island. And that's reflected in some of the mixed messages that we have talked about. So for example, with Biden, he actually came out and said the U.S. would defend Taiwan, and then minutes later we'll have to have the White House come out with a statement to correct that statement, right? And in fact, he actually misspoke about Taiwan 3 times in recent months, and including saying the U.S. would defend Taiwan, or Taiwan is already an independent country, which is also against the official U.S. one-China policy. Now, one could debate whether the misspeaking is strategic or intentional, but or it's just confusion. But I think in terms of, also President Biden was the first one, I think, to invite the Taiwanese representative to the U.S. to attend the inauguration as well.
Wonderful.
So I think there are some mixed messages, and that's perhaps precisely the point of strategic ambiguity. Now, we can debate whether the U.S. should clarify the U.S. position or even come out strongly in defense of Taiwan. I'm supportive of that. But the current policy is actually to be ambiguous. And I think they've been trying
to not show their cards.
Right, and edging a little bit toward more support toward Taiwan actually than less in recent years.
Interesting.
And didn't Tony Blinken also call Taiwan a country? Now you can say that Biden might misspeak, but Tony Blinken's not.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Yes.
Exactly. So I think that it's a very interesting development. I think now it's a bipartisan consensus about all these Chinese behavior that Karla mentioned, or you, Marc, mentioned, that it's sort of compromising the liberal democratic values around the world. Now, how do you deal with that is a totally different question. Now, do you try to impose tariffs across the board to sort of distance the U.S. economy away from China? Whether that's a good idea, we can debate about that. You know, that imposes a lot of costs on U.S. consumers and U.S. companies, small companies, large companies. And so that may not be a good idea, but it doesn't change the fact that people on both sides in the U.S. recognize this as a problem. And that's something that it's not, I don't see it possible to go back to where things used to be, for example, with former President Clinton.
Absolutely. So things are moving in a positive direction. Now, Karla, you said something about the last administration. You were happy that they recognized the issue, but you didn't think that administration, Trump's administration, went far enough. I would like to hear some more color around that.
Basically, I echo what Weifeng Zhong just said, that the tariffs really didn't hurt China as much as they hurt the United States. And I'm not sure what we should have done, but what the Trump administration didn't seem to achieve the goal that he wanted to achieve.
Okay. And what would success have looked like, in your opinion? Because I think some people felt that it did send a strong enough message, and you know, the fact that mentality has carried over to this current administration, despite being a different political party, seems to, for me, look like success.
Now, to me, success would be less belligerence from China towards Taiwan. And it seems to me, if anything, that belligerence has increased over the past few years.
But this belligerence is not limited to just Taiwan. I mean, China has been very imperialistic, not only to Hong Kong, but also to the Philippines, and, you know, occupying some of the islands, and all the neighboring countries. Essentially, you know, raising fears that this could be a similar thing to what Japan did in the early 1930s, leading up to World War II. So and then not only that, but the imperialistic tendencies in Africa concern me greatly.
And that's been going on for a couple of decades.
Absolutely, incrementally, and even what's going on in Afghanistan right now with our pullout and China having a very involved presence there.
Right.
With a new regime.
Yeah, interesting the air base as well after the U.S. pullout. But I think what you pointed out is a very general phenomenon around the world, meaning that for each country, when it comes to China, it's the hard trade-off between the potential economic gains, right, from trading with China, versus the possible security concerns that could be imposed by China on their countries. And different countries might think about the security differently, or meaning that we value our freedom differently from country to country, right?
Right.
Now I think in the US people are coming to realize that we may have sacrificed too much security in exchange for all these economic gains in the past 20 years. But some other countries in Africa would think about it totally differently, right? They might think that there's still a lot more to gain in terms of economic connections with China. And the security risk, we turn a blind eye on it because it hasn't come to bite us yet.
Yes.
So the calculation is drastically different even between among U.S. allies, between U.S. and its allies. Right? And we spoke about the external aggressions by China, but if you look at China internally, there's a lot of atrocities as well, right? Think about the forced labor in the Xinjiang, the Uyghur region of Xinjiang. They're perfectly Chinese people, right? But that's also not only affects the Chinese people, it also affects the global market because we may well be buying goods made with forced labor when we go to Walmart, right? Mm-hmm. We just don't know. Any piece of that may have contained forced labor. And if you look at how liberal democracies reacted to that, sometimes if you look at, for example, when they have the G7 meeting, when they put out a joint statement, right? If you look at the U.S. and its allies, I wrote about this in the Discourse magazine with my colleague Christine McDaniel, where we try to look at how strong the statements are versus how much connection in terms of export to China each country has. Of course, if you have more exports to China, your language tends to be softer already. Mm-hmm. And we are talking about advanced Western economies, or we are talking about liberal democracies already. So not to mention those countries like in Africa or South America.
Absolutely. So a lot of it has to do with our manufacturing base that has really moved to China. I mean, China is a leader now in manufacturing, while we have outsourced a lot of that from the United States. I feel, and I know that there's a prevailing thought out there that by doing that, it severely weakens America. But we seem to not be reversing course on that. We are still relying so much on imports to the point that the supply chain crisis has really crippled a lot of our, flow here in the U.S. I mean, what do you think about that?
I think this is a very interesting question, and it's just similar to when people think about whether China would invade Taiwan. Mm-hmm. If you ask a policymaker in Washington this question, versus if you ask a company that's based in San Francisco, right? Or California, on the West Coast, they would give totally different answers because if you look at the private sector, they are thinking that this is risk so far ahead and possibly very small, but we have so much business in China, so they tend to think that this is highly unlikely. But people in Washington, they are much more concerned about national security, mm-hmm. as opposed to the companies in California, right?
Exactly.
And so I think there might be a disconnect between people, even within our country, where they're looking at the same issue from a different perspective.
Right.
And then those who care about economic benefits, they will think that, the concerns are overblown. But that's precisely why we're here today, because for the past 20 years, we just kept looking at the economic benefits.
Yes.
No, because nobody was thinking about national security. Nobody needed to. I think that was the problem. And
to give credit to Secretary of State Pompeo from the last administration, he really sounded the alarm on this. And I think it's fascinating to see Blinken even kind of follow a little bit of that policy.
And Biden with his executive orders on supply chain security. And he seems to understand that it is a crisis and something that he needs to deal with. Mm-hmm. And one of the ways that our lawmakers are looking at it is onshoring certain critical industries like semiconductors. And one of the ways they see of doing it is strengthening relationships with like-minded partners like Taiwan.
Right.
And they adopted model policy just this last summer, saying that strengthening the U.S.-Taiwan strategic and economic partnership enhances U.S. supply chain security.
Absolutely. And companies adapt. For example, I represent an Asian business organization where we have a lot of supply chain logistics businesses, and I asked one of my board members who has a 150 employee company that really sources and does logistics from Asia to here, and he pivoted When the tariffs came and China, it was not as profitable to do business in China, he started finding ways to kind of make up for that in Vietnam, in Thailand, the Philippines, and other surrounding countries around, because it's not all of Asia that we were tariffing. It was specifically that superpower, China, that has has shown tendencies of imperialism, which is a big concern. I think we all agree with that. So I wanted to move the conversation a little more now to kind of what you were saying earlier about the media. Okay, I have noticed this on the ground. By the way, where are you guys from? Are you guys based here in Southern California?
Oh, we're based in the DC area.
Okay, you're in Washington, D.C., so I'll be your point person on the ground here in SoCal. But in San Gabriel Valley, I have noticed quite a fascinating infiltration of Chinese interests into obviously what makes sense, an area that many immigrants have settled in, the San Gabriel Valley, Orange County. And the first major alarm was a lot of them were running for city council offices and school board. And some of them were actually very exceptionally funded. They joined my organization, and suddenly I'm like, hey, so how are you making your money? They couldn't even give me a real explanation. And then suddenly when you look at the campaign finance reports, they have $100,000 that was just dumped in. So it started alerting me to the fact that there is this concerted effort to take over, local governments on the lowest levels, from school board to city council. And then on top of that, you have the media, World Journal, Singtao, ETTV. All of them are kind of marching the same, the same rhetoric, the same. It's almost like syndicated, right? Like AP, like Associated Press, all of them in lockstep on certain messaging. And I found that very interesting and fascinating. So I've written about that. It's gotten published quite a bit about my thoughts on what I've seen on the ground of foreign infiltration into our local institutions and our media. But I really want to hear from you what you have observed, maybe even from the other side of the country.
Right, so my research in the past few years focuses on Chinese propaganda toward the Chinese people. So that's on within China. But what you reference is a new phenomenon that's really coming out in recent years that's trying to influence overseas media, higher educations in the US,
Yes.
In Europe, and also all these local smaller offices, right, lower level offices. And so I think that basically the various aspects of our civil society are now susceptible of the Chinese influence because of potential economic interest, right? And that's a big problem. And that's in fact the new project I'm starting this year is to try to see whether we can quantify various ways that our values are being compromised. And you reference some of them. And if you look at media, for example, there are a lot of, especially in California, there are a lot of, there's a huge diaspora community from the Chinese people, right, and who live here, and they consume Chinese language newspapers, and the same with, say, New Zealand, Australia, and those newspapers serving those people, Canada, they operate as a free press, but a lot of them actually have content agreement with the Chinese news agencies, and then they just have content straight from Beijing. They run it. Now, is it okay to have a deal with the Chinese news agency? Yeah, it's free market, right? But what's lacking is the disclosure, because when they run Chinese content, sometimes they don't disclose it. So I don't have a problem with per se with a situation where people can freely trade, including content. But I have a lot of problem with when you do that with an authoritarian government, you don't disclose it. The same is also true for higher education. There's actually a federal law requiring universities to disclose the money gifts from foreign governments, right?
So there's an inconsistency there.
Yeah.
There's a disclosure on one end, but then not on the other.
Well, even for universities, actually, the enforcement was really miserable. Because for decades, the university, they take money from, Saudi Arabia, Russian, Chinese governments without disclosing it until 2019, when the education department under Betsy DeVos had a crackdown on higher education, all of the universities. And they started to dig out funds that they realized they received from
Wow.
like 1980s. And so all these problems, I think it's I think our society is not or the rules of a society are not constructed in a way that we are thinking of
The enforcement aspect of it.
right, and thinking about great power like China to try to take advantage.
Yeah.
So I think now is the time to rethink all these rules that govern our societies, what needs to be changed so that the goal is not to block off all these interactions with China,
Of course.
but to have more transparency.
Amen.
And the
Yeah.
states are working on that. In Florida, they had an HB 7017, and we just adopted model policy that was based off of that legislation, where it requires the disclosure of certain countries, and I can share the model policy with
Please.
you. Yeah, absolutely. North Korea, China, Iran, that state agencies have to disclose any gifts. Universities have to disclose any gifts. And so the states are paying attention to that. And there's another organization, Foundation for Defense of Democracies. They spoke at our task force meeting, and they published a really good report, and I can send you a link on Chinese subnational influence in the United States.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's becoming so blatant now. You know, I noticed this very sharply with LA Times. So LA Times was, I believe, bought by, and it was very open that it was bought by the Chinese in about 2019, I believe. So, but even before that, I believe that the second Obama administration, or the second term of the Obama administration, really ramped things up. So, for example, I'll tell you this: I went to grad school at Columbia University in New York, 2011 to 2013. It's funny because the year 2011 to 2012, the demographics of who came in to our program as, it was very mixed. But then the next year, it was like almost all Chinese, which was fascinating because, obviously there's a fiscal calculation there to admit international students. They can pay the full, ride, but I thought that was very interesting to see. In 2009, I went to CPAC in DC, and I stayed in Falls Church, Virginia, and I took the shuttle to the Comfort Suites, which is where I stayed. And it literally, the entire bus was all Chinese people, and I understand. Just to go to the hotel, they obviously weren't there for CPAC; they were there for another reason. But I understand Chinese, and they were talking about buying property. So, a lot of property is actually owned by Chinese nationals now, all around the country. It became a buying spree for the merchant class in China, right? So I was curious about, what if you've seen that phenomenon, and I think state and local governments have an opportunity to maybe put some parameters around that, so it's not a blatant takeover of our land here.
So I think I have to say I have mixed feelings about this issue, in a sense that I don't have a problem per se with foreigners owning properties in the United States. We have a lot of foreigners owning properties in the United States, right? Is it a problem per se? Not necessarily. And I think we need, at some point we need to draw a line between, are we talking about issues against authoritarian influence by the Chinese governments or affiliates of the Chinese government in our democratic institutions,
right?
Versus just buying properties at an individual citizen level, which should not be a problem. Now, if they buy properties and then use it for some other purposes for influence, that's a different issue, right? But buying properties and then holding it for appreciation or maybe for residence,
that's investments, and that's good for us.
Yeah, exactly.
Especially foreign monies from there coming into here, that actually levels the playing field. I understand, especially when we're talking about trade imbalances, that's a good thing for us because they're investing in America, right?
And I remember when we panicked over Japan buying up lots of property in the United States, and that ended up not hurting us at all.
Yeah.
Right. So I think going back to the issue, I think what I said before is that I think more important for us is to have more transparency, and then when you have more transparency, how much influence are we willing to accept from China? It's a decision that should be made by the people. Right now, for example, if you think about universities, is it okay for universities to accept gifts? Yes. You have to
disclose it.
Disclose it, right?
Yes.
Exactly.
And
Be transparent.
And there are many other ways for us to see whether academic freedom is compromised on campuses. You can look at what they're teaching in the classroom, look at their syllabus, right? So one part of the new project I'm doing is to actually look at digitized versions of syllabi on American campuses over the years, and see whether that has anything to do with the fundings they get from China, or how many students are from China, or whether they have Confucius Institutes as well. Right? So even if when our society also knows them very well, and if the university still decides to be pro-China, it's their freedom.
That's right.
Right? And when the professor is willing or wanting to teach Marxism in their classroom, it's their academic freedom. But people need to know about this.
Yes.
And if they, when people know about it and then they still want to do it, that's their choice.
That's right.
We should not use oppression as a way to counter another oppression from China.
I love that. That is a very quotable right there. We should not use oppression to counter other oppression, because that is a compounding negativity that will end up not working anyways. But let's admit it, there is a real cultural phenomenon, especially in the last 10 years, of we're losing kind of our American identity of rugged individualism and being, and I see more collectivist mentality, and especially in the youth. I remember growing up, and it's like cool to rebel. It's cool to, right? And that's the American spirit of, counterculture. We're free to be whoever we want. There is this conformity thing now that is coming in, and I've analyzed this because of our, our pop culture programming. A lot of it is like, conform, be like everyone else, don't stick out from the crowd. Now, I think that has, we've had about 10 years of that, since about 2012. And Robert Spalding, I don't know if you know him, General Robert Spalding, wrote this really good book about, and he was with the CIA, and he was in China for many years, and he saw a lot of our institutions getting bought up, basically, down to, Alibaba, to all of the WeChat, all of that. That has really come in. I mean, TikTok, there's a great example. TikTok, which is Chinese, has basically taken over and captured the American hearts and minds. And as far as app share, when all the time spent on apps, TikTok is probably our #1 app at this point. So it is very fascinating, because I think we are kind of moving towards that, where the Chinese, for many years, it was just economic, like we had talked about, but now it's becoming more cultural. And that is the way that they're able to kind of, influence Americans and American culture. And, I think a lot of, one can argue, this is just a debate point, that a lot of our current issues with, the woke culture are coming from that collectivist mentality. And it kind of, to me, in all honesty, reeks of the Cultural Revolution. That is what my great-grandmother had escaped with her 2 young children, left her whole life to go to the Philippines, because she said, I can't have this. This is crazy. They're burning books. We see this. Statues are taken down. I mean, this is very eerily similar to the Cultural Revolution, but it's happening in America, which I thought would be the last place it would happen.
I think so. Karla could speak to this subject much better than I do, but that's my favorite subject, which is federalism, right? Or the diversity or decentralization of power in American society, which is something that we are losing, I think.
Yes.
So if you look at election, right, the turnout of presidential elections is way higher than turnout for city council, right? For a reason, because I think now the entire society, much more and more important decisions are made at the federal level, not at the state level or the city level, and that's causing all these
conforming,
right?
Yeah.
Or conformism, And so, and I think in the end, like the problem of Chinese influence, like Karla said, I think it has to be resolved in the state level and the local level, because that's where changes could actually happen. If you put your hope on Washington, very few things can happen in Washington.
Right.
Unless you give it a very long time, right?
Yeah. So what are some tangible things that your organization and your involvement with ALEC has been able to do as far as the state and local level? Because that is this organization's focus is get involved on the lower levels and do like Karen Fan, our incoming chair, had said today. It's a bottom up. And I've been a big believer of that. As a community organizer, really for me, it's all about bottom up and at creating a foundation.
Well, the Federalism and International Relations Task Force is a little bit different than most of the other task forces at ALEC, because instead of adopting model policy that ends up being legislation in state legislatures, I mean, there are exceptions, like the one that I referenced on transparency from foreign actors that could be problematic. That's legislation. That would become legislation. Most of what we do are resolutions, where state lawmakers adopt resolutions calling on the federal government to do certain things.
Got it.
And so sometimes that's international trade, sometimes that's national security. So that's one of the things that our task force has done. In addition to that, we've tried to do symbolic things for the state lawmakers to show their support for Taiwan. One of the things we did a year ago was we presented President Tsai Ing-wen with our International Pioneer Award. The only other recipient of it had been Margaret Thatcher. And that was our way of saying, we value Taiwan and we value Taiwan's sovereignty. And we actually got some blowback from the Chinese embassy from that. They tried
No way.
Wow.
I know you're shocked.
But no, that's great, and I do like that. The bottom up is joining the chorus to get something done on the federal level.
And also, state lawmakers have a lot more influence with federal lawmakers than the three of us do.
Right.
First of all, a lot of them grew up in the legislature, the state legislature together. And testament to that is around 100 current members of Congress used to be ALEC members back when they were in the state legislature. So they're on a first name basis with each other. And also, a congressman knows that anything that a state lawmaker does is backed by several thousand of his constituents.
Right. Yeah, and that's powerful. And that's how state and federal government should be working together. There should be an open line of communication, just like you had said, the transparency, let's all be on the same page. Now, there is a phenomenon I have noticed, once again, being on the ground in San Gabriel Valley, is the Asian diaspora is intermarrying, and there's a lot of Chinese that are marrying Taiwanese. There's a lot of Taiwanese that are doing business with the Chinese, and I see less and less of people willing to stick their heads out. So I admire you guys and your bravery and fighting unequivocally for Taiwan. And and to protect Taiwan. I have seen even some elected officials become more reticent to support free China, rather than in sometimes in the past they were much more vocal. But there has been a very strong drumbeat by the CCP to stop that, and actually they've been very masterful about it. So we've had some Chinese officials come and wine and dine me, and really nice restaurant. Oh, everything's good, blah blah blah, right? So I have seen how sly they are and how slick they are. But the net effect really is a new generation now that is very blind to a lot of the past history or even what's currently happening in China and Taiwan, that is not resolved. That is not resolved for almost 100 years. But when you have people in America that have been here a long while, they are desensitized to some of that. How do we combat that? Do you see the same thing in the East Coast? I'd love to hear your thoughts.
I think that to me the nature seems to be very similar to all these bigger questions that we talked about, which is that the Chinese influence has now gotten to the more local level, and there are Chinese operatives.
You don't tell people at all?
No,
We
we're
are
not.
not.
I'm trying to figure out how the hell to get out of here.
So, for example, there are Chinese, a lot of Chinese residents in America. They perhaps have relatives in China or they have friends in China, and sometimes that have been used as leverage for Chinese operatives to say, stay silent, right? Otherwise, you also and so we get into trouble. And that's the level of Chinese influence now has gotten to is at the local or individual level.
Right.
And but that's also the nature of the problem. I think is the same with when you think about businesses as well. All this is because of the interest or security that we want to keep in exchange for abiding by what the Chinese government wants us to say or not say, right? And so I think it's from a big picture angle. I think it's the same problem. And a lot of Chinese influence that we look at, I echo what Karla said earlier, because I think at the local level, state level is very important, because Chinese influence, they often happens within the legal boundaries of the United States, for precisely the reason that a lot of laws are out of date, right? We're not prepared for such an influence scenario. Hence, the operations are within legal boundaries. When it's within legal boundaries, a lot of things happen without us knowing because it's not breaking any laws.
Right.
And so that calls for people who have the information at the local level to come together and first of all to unveil the information or provide more insights into the extent of all these influence, like you mentioned. What you said, not everybody in Washington knows about it, right? And there's things that happen in Washington that people in California don't know. And so I think actually putting together the information and create a transparency that I mentioned rests on the power at the local level. And hence creating a forum where people can securely or safely speak out.
Right.
This is lacking as well, because you don't see a place where people who do not want to disclose their identity could actually come forward and provide information in a way that's secure and provide insight for policymakers. So I think it's a hard problem. It's not a problem that people at the federal or policymakers at the federal level can easily come up with a solution.
So on the state and local level, what are some of the action steps we can take to kind of curtail this and move this back to a place where it aligns more with respecting Taiwan and having people even care about the issue, and also to combat where a lot of the outlets like World Journal, like all of those publications that are really in the CCP pocket, how do we get the message out? How do we make this work?
Well, one of the messengers actually is TechRo. I mean, they are one of the most effective diplomatic missions I've ever seen, and I've been dealing with embassies for a couple of decades now. They're great at engaging at the state level, much better than most consulates and most embassies are. They're very good at having students study not just at the elite universities, but Taiwan is very good at sending students to Idaho State University, for example. Universities in flyover country, so to speak.
Yes.
The other thing that I've noticed, I have to confess, the vast majority of the people I know in the Asian community are from Taiwan. I don't know, basically, except for a couple of people at the PRC embassy, I don't really know many people from mainland China. But one of the things I've noticed in just my local community is China has been overplaying its hand, and where people who normally wouldn't have even cared are all of a sudden caring. The Uyghurs, I think, were a big tipping point, and Hong Kong was another one. When my daughters, who just aren't, they don't have a love of international relations like their mother does. They just don't.
That gene didn't transfer.
And when they started talking to me about what was going on in Hong Kong and asking me about it, that's when I knew, oh boy, you overstepped, China, when my kids are asking me about it. So
absolutely, and we saw those horrific images. We saw the desperate calls for freedom, the U.S. flags in Hong Kong. That was so powerful, and I think it did reach beyond echo chambers. But I noticed that the human rights has become put in such the back burner, especially in the last 10 years. I mean, the Uyghurs situation, in the past, I know we've dealt with Epoch Times and the Falun Gong, and there was some persecution there. But it seems like now it's even more blatant and out in the open. What are your thoughts around that? Does that signal China's growing need to be an out-front imperialist at this point, or going that direction, or do you think that the response to the recent situations in Uyghurs and Hong Kong has made them step back even just a little?
I think so. I think there are two main reasons that can explain China's actions on minorities. One is that China has increasingly realized that one country cannot have diversity. One country cannot have two systems. That's why Hong Kong doesn't work. And the level of social control, the Chinese government realized that it needs a lot of social control for its grand economic programs, including Belt and Road initiatives. And the Xinjiang region is in the way, right? So you do need, but the Chinese government realized that it needs the uniform control on the society for all these grand planning to work. And another was the commitment to eliminate extreme poverty. And so you reference the forced labor that's very explicit, like putting them into internment camps. Mm-hmm. But there are another type of forced labor that's softer, which is that they just run people up from their homes and ask them to join the poverty alleviation programs to work because they were considered by the Chinese government to be too lazy, right? So they're not in camps, but they are still, to some extent, forced to work because otherwise they would have stayed home and watch TV.
Right.
So in that sense, you're forcing them to work. So oppression, there are harder versions, there are softer versions, and overall, it's because of the big push under President Xi to sort of eliminate poverty.
Right.
So we might think of this. I think I look at this issue with the light under the light slightly different from a lot of Americans tend to look at it, because I think there is some internal intentional design motivations on the Chinese government's part. Mm-hmm. Not to say that's the right thing to do, but I'm saying that it's because all this is driven by some grand plan that the authoritarian regime has.
I mean, talk about federalism gone wild, right?
Exactly.
I mean, that's China for you. Everything top down, and that just really cannot work in America. I think as much as we try. In fact, what was very fascinating, because I think our American culture, even though it has moved more collectivist in the younger generation, we're having enough of a backlash from those probably 40 and older that have seen, that have been around and know what freedom means. And I think that's a teaching moment from the older generations to the younger generations on what choices mean, what being an individual means. And I kind of covered this because the movie Shang-Chi, the Marvel movie that broke box office records here in America, that was a huge success here. But guess what? In China, it was banned. And so China was not okay with the message that was, individualist in nature, even coming from Asian Chinese characters that were portraying that role. So I think, I have a little bit of optimism, and I'm glad to hear, there is an undercurrent of optimism here that even the Biden administration sees China as, I don't want to say a threat, but we need to kind of not make that make it more of a level playing field than the unchecked excesses of Clinton, Bush, Obama years.
Right, and I think that's why one striking aspect that to me is the continuation or continuity in terms of China policy between former President Trump and President Biden.
Mm-hmm.
I actually wrote about it in I think on national interest. National interest.
I'd love to see that, by the way. Please
the
send
month
that to me.
before, the month after President Biden took office, I said the China policy under Biden would be very, very much similar to under Trump. But I did not see how it's that similar.
Oh yeah, they continued.
So, right, it's continuous as if untouched, and so that reflects again the bipartisan consensus about the problems, all the problems China created for the U.S.
Absolutely, and that's a rare thing, right? When we can, when those two parties can come together on certain things. But that's great. Do you guys have anything else you want to kind of share? Because I'm going to do a write-up here about kind of what we talked about and more like a lay of the land, like what is the state of Taiwan, China relation and U.S. relations type of thing. So that's kind of going to be the crux of the piece.
The only thing I would add is another way that China, I think, is overstepped or overplayed its hand is in the surveillance state and exporting that surveillance state. And the reason I say that is something that also seems to be off-putting to the younger generation, or at least with my kids. And it was a topic of conversation at a Munich Federalism conference that I attended back in 2019. I was talking with Hans Seidel Foundation representatives who were in Pakistan. And they were talking about how China had exported surveillance technology there to hone their AI and to get the AI used to reading faces that are typical in Pakistan. And just that Hans Seidel Foundation person's horror at what was going on there and going on in Africa as well in terms of the export of the surveillance state. So that's one of the things that
Absolutely. What a great point. And it kind of just makes me think of big data. Big data is really controlled by the Chinese. They have, really, down, like you said, down to the ring technology and all the stuff that you can use an app to turn off your lights, all that convenience. We've traded our privacy for the convenience and the luxury. But you think that there's, especially with your younger generation, you're seeing that boomerang on them. Yeah, I think privacy is going to become more and more an issue, especially with the mandates for the vaccines and all of that. It's just going to be fascinating to watch. So I think we're in a time of change, and it's good to kind of catch up with you guys on this very specific moment in history, 1 year into the Biden administration, and seeing that continuity. Going a positive direction. So let's hope that continues. And do you guys have any personal websites that you guys want to plug? For people that are interested in this issue to do further research. For one, I'd love to read some of the papers that you did. So
sure, yeah. And the work I mentioned about monitoring Chinese propaganda. If your readers are interested, they can find that on the policychangeindex.org.
policychangeindex.org.
And that's where we track all the movements in terms of the words printed in Chinese propaganda newspaper, and then make inferences about what might be the next moves.
and Discourse magazine.
And Discourse magazine, yes, where we wrote about forced labor issue, but we have two separate special series in the Discourse magazine. It's an online magazine run by Mercatus. We have a special issue about the future of Taiwan, and then we have a much longer series about the China challenge, including various aspects, forced labor, and the China's the new Cultural Revolution 2.0 under presidency. So we have all sorts of issues covering China specifically and then Taiwan specifically as
Oh, very fascinating. And once again, just on that website, Policy Change Index.
Index.org.
Okay. And how about you, Karla?
Our Alex Across the State podcast series, we've actually featured Weifeng several times in that.
Wonderful.
And the ALEC blog, where we write frequently about Taiwan. And of course, our model policy, which also is on the ALEC website. We've got a lot of Taiwan model policy going. I mean, addressing everything from resolutions in support of Taiwan Relations Act, Taiwan Travel Act, and the one I mentioned about supply chains, and possibly our most popular state lawmaker-driven letter was to the Biden administration urging them to expedite negotiation of a U.S.-Taiwan BTA. We had well over 200 signers on that letter, state lawmaker signers.
Okay, and the net effect of that pushed the administration to...
We hope.
Wow.
I think there are some encouraging movements recently, including the invitation of Taiwan to join the Democracy Summit, right, which is coming up next week.
Right.
So and not invite China for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
So I think there are good things happening, and I would to add last words is to say I think we need to have more optimism. There's a lot of powers. There's the reason I love to come to this audience and talk to the task force run by Karla is to talk to the people who can actually make a difference at the local level, which I think we should have more optimism about.
Now, okay, I know we're not fortune tellers, but predictions when Taiwan will be recognized, like say by the United Nations and maybe the world to as a sovereign nation. Do you have any predictions on that?
I'm not too optimistic about that. I have more hope on the U.S. coming to Taiwan's defense in the event of an invasion.
Okay.
Sooner than recognizing Taiwan.
So that's status
as a member
quo,
of the
though.
EU.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Because if you, nevertheless, China, U.S. still has a one China policy.
China's got the one child policy, but not anymore.
Right. Both are controversial, but so if Taiwan is submitted to the United Nations, it would go directly against one China policy. Right. But coming to Taiwan's defense in the event of a Chinese invasion of Taiwan, of the island, would not go against one China policy. I'm actually more optimistic about the latter. Not that I hope it would happen, but if it happens, I do hope that the U.S. would come to Taiwan's defense.
Absolutely.
And I think that might come actually sooner than the admission of Taiwan into the UN.
And you, Karla?
I'm a little more optimistic than you about recognition of Taiwan as a nation. And it's just because you see tiny incremental change within the UN, and especially with the pandemic, we need Taiwan.
Right.
We need Taiwan in ICAO. And that's another model policy we had actually. And so I think just pragmatism might move the needle on recognition of Taiwan by official multilateral organizations like the UN. I'm keeping my fingers crossed about the United States coming to Taiwan's defense. I am more optimistic now than I was 6 months ago.
Yes.
Interesting.
But I'm still, that keeps me up at night.
I love it.
We should definitely do this again in another year or two to see
Absolutely.
which crystal ball is working better.
Yes, absolutely. But I think, like you both said, things are marching to a positive direction. And I think, at the end of the day, to your point, I think China has overstepped in such a big way that people are now awake. And what I'm finding fascinating is, I think in the end of the day, if you talk to average Joe or average Chen on the street in San Gabriel Valley and Orange County, there is a desire for unity and for, the respect of giving Taiwan that recognition. And I think the younger generation may save us on that. As crazy and woke as they are, I think there's some deep-seated values to recognize everyone's worth. So I will try to be as optimistic as possible and hope that it doesn't just stay status quo. But thank you for taking the time, and I know it's late, and I appreciate you guys. We ended up taking actually a walk all the way down, like 2 miles down. So I was like, oh, I can't get back by 6, but so I really appreciate you guys, and
No problem.
we'll see you guys tomorrow, maybe
Yeah,
at the
absolutely.
session. So,
Yeah.
all right, thank you,
Thank you very
Weifeng.
much.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Karla. You
Thank
guys are the
you.
best.